world. It's about time. Tonight, Dangerous Assumptions, Spring 1953. Here are Linda Ellerbee and Ray Gandolf.
For the next hour, think of your television set as a time machine.
Where we're going tonight, television and issues are black and white. Shades of gray are for flannel suits.
Welcome to the spring of 1953, and never assume anything. Or so the grown-ups say. Tonight's story includes the assumption of mountains, thrones, innocence, and longevity. And the grown-ups were right, twice anyway. Or so I assume.
In a popular song of the 1940s, Bill Kenny of the Ink Spots sang, "I'd climb the highest mountain if I knew that when I climbed that mountain, I'd find you." He was kidding, pure romantic bravado. George Mallory, an Englishman who did try to climb the highest mountain, said he was doing it because it's there. He wasn't kidding. He died trying to climb Mount Everest in 1924. In the spring of '53, 11 Britons, 1 Sherpa, and 2 New Zealanders with 36 native Sherpa guides and a color film camera set out to conquer the unconquered.
Take my hand, I'm a stranger in paradise, all lost in a wonderland, a stranger in paradise. If I stand starry-eyed, that's a danger in paradise.
We started off from Kathmandu with 9 tons of baggage.
British Army Colonel John Hunt, leader.
The planning, the choosing the team, and the decisions about clothing, equipment, food, and all those things was all my responsibility.
Base camp, 18,000 feet. Only 11,000 feet to go. First, carry 3 tons of supplies over a jumbled piece of glacier called an icefall to here, 21,000 feet. Then carry 500 pounds to here, 26,000 feet. Is this the top? No. Teams are formed, one of them so unlikely it must be a match made in heaven, or in this case, nearby. Tenzing Norgay, Sherpa guide, meet Edmund Hillary, New Zealand beekeeper.
If there were 2 prima donnas on the expedition who would themselves want to reach the summit, those prima donnas were probably Tenzing and myself.
The initial difficulty is getting up the icefall, not only difficult but dangerous, because an icefall tumbling down some 2,000 feet in a distance of half a mile is a very steep place. It means that ice is in an unpredictable state of movement, and enormous quantities, tons of ice, may collapse at any one moment.
We had carried up from the forest far below some tree trunks. As the crevasses were under constant movement, sometimes opening and sometimes closing, the bridges we had over them would be destroyed, and we would have to find a new way around.
I think we were very lucky that we had no fatal accident.
They will need luck and more to scale what Hillary's people call Mount Everest and Tenzing's people call Chomolungma. They say Tenzing, who's done more time on this mountain than anyone, has a 3rd lung. Considering what comes next, wings would be more helpful. It's assumed 3 days will be enough for the advance team to carve a path across here. It's assumed the limited supply of bottled oxygen being saved for later won't be needed until later. Dangerous assumptions. Nine days into this 3-day job, it is later, much sooner. But with the help of bottled oxygen, they open the way to the South Col, that mountain pass about 5 miles above sea level. Now, all that stands between them and the top of the mountain is 3,000 feet of straight up.
Everyone was at the point where they knew that for them to survive and to keep moving, they were at their limits.
George Lowe, also from New Zealand, also at or near the limit.
Being at the height of the South Col, 26,000 feet, we had the sort of feel of the smell of death around us.
They remember how 29 years before, fewer than 800 feet from the summit, Mallory vanished. It's written that what goes up must come down. It is not written when or how.
In the Korean War, the smell of death is 3 years old this spring. But Stalin is dead now. There's new leadership in Moscow and Washington, and there's new hope.
In this spring of 1953, the free world weighs one question above all others: the chances for a just peace for all people.
In late March, the North Koreans and Chinese agree to negotiate a swap of sick and wounded prisoners. The talks will be held in the neutral zone near the 38th parallel. Admiral John Daniel heads the UN delegation.
It was extremely important that we both arrive into the conference hut together. And then when we got in, there they faced us. But on that table, we had two little flags. One of them was the UN, and the other was the Korean. And ours happened to be a little higher than theirs. The next day, we noticed theirs were higher. Then finally, the security forces up there made some sort of agreement, and we finally were the same height, and that contest stopped.
On April 11th, Daniel signs. 5,800 North Korean and Chinese prisoners will be exchanged for 600 UN prisoners. Operation Little Switch begins.
Convoys pass on a Korean road. One carries Reds to an unknown fate, the other United Nations men to freedom.
Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why did I ever leave Ohio? Why did I wander to find what lies yonder when life was so cozy at home? Wandered while I wandered. Why did I fly? Why did I roam? Oh, why, did I leave Ohio? Maybe I'd better go.
After 31 months in prison, Vernon Warren is free.
The Red Cross nurses, they took charge. They gave us our little bags, you know, that had toothpaste and razors, and they had a clean set of clothes, and they took us to a delousing station and got a bath, and that made me feel real good that I was being finally on my way home.
Donald Legay finds out he's a celebrity.
We were going through the tents, and somebody jumped down and said, "You want to be interviewed for television?" And looked at the kid and said, "What television?" So we went in, and then they had all these lights, and you couldn't see. People on the other side asking you questions.
The American POWs are flown to Tokyo for debriefing and medical treatment. Major Henry Siegel, a psychiatrist.
I first saw the POWs when they returned to Tokyo 24 hours after being released from captivity. And the most striking thing about them was their almost blank expression and eyes that didn't quite make contact. And in fact, we gave them a title of being zombies.
Zombie, an old word for the walking dead. Brainwashing, a new word that these walking live men will bring home to describe the psychological manipulation they endured for nearly 2 years of their captivity. It was not physical torture, but it was insidious and incessant at their prison camp on the Yalu River.
In the summer of '51, they started with their brainwashing. And what that was, they took us to classes every day, twice a day, in the morning and in the afternoon, 4 hours of class. As they started it, at that time, they downgraded the United States as much as they could. They had films that they showed us.
The United States forces are waging bacteriological warfare in Korea and northeast China.
My germination took place on the 27th of March, 1952, and it was a VT germination.
Whenever they let me write home, I wrote in the letters that I told my mother that the Chinese was treating me fine.
They did get petitions signed. For that matter, I even signed one of them.
This was the thing that they wanted to hear, so that then we was able to get some food.
Ultimately, the men were very, very much given to taking part in this program, not necessarily out of any anti-patriotic feelings for America, but the need to survive.
Most of the 149 American POWs are home free, but for a few, flown in great secrecy to a U.S. Army hospital, it's not over yet. Major Siegel was on that plane, so was Vernon Warren.
They had 21 of us, and they said we had been brainwashed. And I didn't know what the heck they was talking about, being brainwashed at the time, but we didn't even get a chance to even go buy a soda.
To my knowledge, this was not a special group of egregious collaborators with the enemy, and it did not make sense to me that they were sent to Valley Forge.
At Valley Forge Hospital, the press is on the verge of a dangerous assumption. But the men have not bought the communist bill of goods.
Then Private Rogers Herndon and Corporal Vernon Warren speak for all the mistakenly suspected men.
Did you undergo systematic communist indoctrination?
We did.
Was it compulsory?
It wasn't compulsory, but it was highly recommended.
I felt betrayed. I went to Korea. I laid my life on the line for my country. And then when I came back feeling like treated like something that'd been left outside for so long, I just felt outraged about it.
For the POWs not at Valley Forge, redemption is immediate. Donald Legay gets a hero's welcome.
Aloha from hula girls resounding in their ears. They go for a rest and checkup before the flight to the United States mainland.
At the airport in Frisco, I got a call from Gary Moore's show. I got a secret. They asked me if I would go on the show.
I've Got a Secret, starring Gary Moore.
All right, now, sir, if you will whisper your secret to me, at the same time, we will reveal it to the folks at home.
My, that was quite a reception from the audience. Was it, by any chance, an honor that you received?
Not specifically stated in the secret.
Not, I wouldn't say exactly an honor.
Is there a title connected with this?
No.
No?
$10 down, $70 to go. Mr. Henry Morgan.
I ought to say right away that as soon as you sat down, we heard the applause. We knew it was something good or very much worthwhile. Were you one of the fellows that just has been exchanged?
Henry, you have got it.
If POWs were good showbiz, communism was not. On April 9th, the baseball club known as the Cincinnati Reds announced it wanted to be known as the Cincinnati Redlegs. Obviously, the team did not wish to be mistaken for a bunch of commies. However, considering the club's official name was not Redlegs, but Red Stockings, one wonders what else the team did not wish to be mistaken for. Come back to the spring of 1953 to Ethel, Mary, Marty, and yes, the mountain.
He drives a real shafty convertible. He really has it. Oh, when he looks at me, I get, squishy. Come on!
Welcome back to the spring of 1953. Modern design is all the rage this season. This is something called a Bertoia chair, very big. Bermuda shorts are very big. Some men even wear them to the office below their jackets and ties. L&M Cigarettes has perfected the alpha cellulose filter tip, just what the doctor ordered, end quote. Dangerous assumption. Robert Abplanalp has just introduced a little plastic valve that makes the aerosol spray can cheaper to make and difficult to avoid. Mixed blessing. And Major League Baseball has come to network television, with Dizzy Dean taking more liberties with the English language than he ever did with Mel Ott. And what's all that?
Now tell me, what's that, baby, what's that? 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 What's that under my bed? What's that, baby, what's that? 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 What's that, baby, what's that?
Come on. I want you to meet a great new star. The new 1953 Chevrolet. See the USA in your Chevrolet. America is asking you to call. Performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA. See it in your Chevrolet.
Or watch it on your RCA. Coming to a TV set near you this spring, Major League Baseball, Superman, and sappy songs.
I know I'd go from right
in that wonderful moment, something happened to my heart.
No other love have I. Only my love for you.
We loved Lucy. Lucille Ball, too. And when Lucille got pregnant, so did Lucy. Why not? If art could imitate life, so could TV. And so could a brand new magazine. Marty Lewis, West Coast editor of TV Guide, whose first issue appeared that April.
I said, Lucy just gave birth to a baby. We're giving birth to a magazine. What would you think of the idea of putting Lucy's baby on our first cover? And I said, Desi, we're going to put the baby on the first cover of TV Guide magazine.
Anything is better than that. Come on, I'll do it. I'll do it.
He said, oh, no, you're not. He said, you can't have it. We promised the exclusive to Life magazine.
When the wind blows the gray.
I said, Desi, what do you want to do, get me fired before I start? He opened his desk drawer and pulled out some transparencies, and he says, I'll be right back, which gave me time enough to pick the transparency I wanted. It wasn't long after we came out with our cover, Scooping Life, when they called Desi to complain. And he says, I didn't give it to him. I don't know how they got it. And he told the truth. He didn't give it to me. I stole it.
And Ford stole the ratings, with the help of a couple of Broadway pros. It was Ford's 50th anniversary extravaganza and the only time two networks, NBC and CBS, broadcast the same entertainment program at the same time. It starred Ms. Mary Martin, Ms. Ethel Merman.
Business I know. You get word before the show has started that your favorite uncle died at dawn. And top of that, your pa and ma have parted. Broken heart, but you go on. There's no people like show people.
It's like two horses in tandem. You went, and you just started, and you never stopped. It was, and you could feel it in the audience. You had a live audience, too. And no chance to do it again, ever. Merman and I learned this duet together. She was singing, I Get a Kick Out of You. I stood behind her, just looking at her with such joy to be performing with her.
Merman on Martin? She's okay, if you like talent.
I'm sure that if I took even one sniff, that would bore me terrifically. Yet I get a kick out of you.
It just was a special period that I am very happy and feel very fortunate to have been a part of at the beginning of television.
And my daddy, he treats it so well.
Television didn't need Martin and Merman to drive Hollywood gaga. Max Youngstein was one of the heads of United Artists.
There were a lot of experiments to try to chase off the competition of TV. You had the development of Cinerama. You had the development of CinemaScope. Give them what they couldn't see in their home because it was impossible to duplicate the size of the production.
20th Century Fox bought CinemaScope from the French. Daryl Zanuck peddled it to Americans.
We have a large screen that gives a semicircle around the theater, and you have the feeling that instead of looking at a small picture that you're observing, you have the feeling that you are in the picture, in the drama.
The first CinemaScope movie in production that spring was The Robe. It starred Richard Burton and Gene Simmons.
They wait to hear your defense.
It is not true that those of us who follow the teachings of Jesus are engaged in any plot against the state.
The CinemaScope process used a special lens that scrunched up the image. People looked like an El Greco painting. Then the image was unsqueezed for showing in a theater on an extra-wide screen. You needed special glasses for another Hollywood gimmick that spring, 3D. The second three-dimensional color movie starred Vincent Price.
they had to invent other things that would bring people in. One of them was 3D, which I happened to be a part of because I did a movie called The House of Wax, and it packed them in. I used to go and sit in the back of the theater, preferably behind a couple of teenage girls. One day at the end of the picture, after they catch me, I leaned forward and I said to these girls, "Did you like it?" They just went, "Toom." I suppose my voice was identifiable by the end of the picture. It was extraordinary, the fear that the movie people had and the lengths they would go to bring people back into the theater.
A television critic wrote that spring that there's nothing wrong with Hollywood that a little TV can't cure. Hollywood had been selling some of its drab old B-movies to television, and now for the first time, the Academy Awards were televised live.
This is indeed a wedding of two great entertainment mediums, with motion pictures and television. And with Oscar 25 years old, it's high time he got married.
It was a shotgun wedding, but it lasted. Hollywood began previewing new movies on Ed Sullivan's Toast of the Town.
And now, we're going to give you a national preview of a 20th Century Fox picture, Titanic, starring Clifton Webb and Barbara Stanwyck.
Please, madam.
Hip, hip Hollywood. Hip, hip TV. Hooray for showbiz.
Television, a stepchild, common assumption, until a certain Sunday night in May, 1953, when a little live TV play climbed out, grabbed us by the heart, and wouldn't let go until we cried, "Marty."
Well, what do you feel like doing tonight? I don't know. What do you feel like doing? Well...
A love story about the kind of people you generally see at the movies, not in them. And it was good, Marty was. And when they did make a movie of it, it won the Best Picture of the Year, Marty did. Marty, a made-for-television movie.
Return to Dangerous Assumptions, spring 1953, when our world continues.
How much is that dog in the window? The one with the waggly tail.
Our world will be right back.
That dog in the window. I do hope that doggy is for sale. I must take a trip.
Welcome back to Our World in the spring of 1953. We have seen some intrepid explorers make the dangerous assumption that they can scale Mount Everest safely. We'll follow them to the end of their journey a little later tonight. We have seen Hollywood make the false assumption that it can squelch television by putting bad movies into big fancy packages. And that's not all we're assuming in the spring of '53.
Right. Take books. In spring, Senator Joe McCarthy, claiming the State Department's overseas libraries were riddled with commie literature, actually got the United States government into the book-burning business for a while. But you know, it's a funny thing about books. It's bad enough to want to burn them, but it's downright stupid to assume you can. You see? You can't burn a book. All you can burn is paper and ink and glue. Books will not be burned. The same cannot be said about people.
In the spring of '53, this country conducts 11 nuclear tests in 80 days in the air over Yucca Flats, Nevada, and marks the second anniversary of the conviction of 2 New Yorkers as atomic spies.
Someone had passed America's atomic bomb secrets to Russia. This was an undisputed fact that the whole world knew. The federal government had laid the crime at the doorstep of 2 native New Yorkers, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. In April of 1951, the federal court of Judge Irving R. Kaufman found the pair guilty as charged and sentenced them to death in the electric chair to pay for their crime of treason.
At the time of their parents' conviction in 1951, Robbie Rosenberg is almost 4. Michael is 8.
The image of my mother is softness. Dark, round face, very soft, very comfortable. My father was very exciting, very excited person. He used to love to talk about sports.
The boys are allowed to see their parents on death row at Sing Sing prison. They make regular visits, accompanied by Emanuel Block, the Rosenbergs' lawyer. For them, as for most children that age, death is an abstraction.
Visits, to me, they were absolutely fantastic. No hearts and flowers, no upset. We played this game, which, you know, when you think about it, in a condemned cells in a prison was an odd game to play. It was called Hangman, where you...
I remember you playing that.
Yeah,
I remember
you
looking
spell
over your
out,
shoulder. It was a mystery to me because I didn't have to spell.
Right, you had spelling things, and if you got a misspelling, you got another part of the body. And if you had enough misspellings, the whole body dangled from the noose, and you just lost the game. I had absolutely no thought that this was a macabre thing to be doing when my parents were facing execution.
The Supreme Court refuses to hear the Rosenbergs' repeated appeals. President Eisenhower refuses to grant clemency. Treason must be punished. James Kilsheimer was an assistant for the prosecution.
We in the government considered it the most important case in the country at the time and for many years before that time.
Gloria Agron was an assistant for the defense.
There was a steamroller going to finish this case because of the protests in Paris and Rome and Milan, all over the world.
Demonstrators in this country and a dozen countries in Europe protest the death sentence, some because they believe the Rosenbergs are innocent, others because it's the first time anyone will have been executed in peacetime for conspiracy to commit espionage. Robert Lamphere had worked on the case for the FBI.
We had thousands of American boys dying in Korea, and the idea that we would, at the height of the Korean War, give in to the protests that were being mounted by the Soviet propaganda machine was just unthinkable.
The White House gets thousands of letters and telegrams every week, pleading for the Rosenbergs' lives. Robbie and Michael Rosenberg deliver their letter in person. On June 15th, having refused to grant a stay of execution, the Supreme Court adjourns for the summer. In 3 days, the Rosenbergs are scheduled to die. At least that's the assumption.
June 16th, never assume. Justice William O. Douglas delays his vacation long enough to hear new arguments from new lawyers, Mike Farmer and Daniel Marshall. Maybe, just maybe. Meanwhile, at Sing Sing, Manny Block has brought the children to see their parents for what may or may not be the last time ever.
I had really thrown a rather emotional fit walking out of that prison because they were treating it like the same old goodbye. And I knew that if everything didn't go our way, they would live one more day after Robbie and I left. So I started wailing one more day to live, and I just wailed that all the way out of the prison cell.
Block reads to reporters what the Rosenbergs have written to the president.
We told you the truth. We are innocent. The truth does not change. We now again solemnly declare our innocence.
June 17th, from Douglas, a stay of execution. Nobody will die yet.
On our way back from the Supreme Court, having gotten the stay on Fike Farmer's points, we didn't care how we got it or whatever, because time was life. So on the way back to the hotel, we bought a very large bottle of scotch, and we're getting ready to celebrate.
When Justice Douglas granted the stay, there were meetings in the Department of Justice. There was an application made to the Chief Justice to reconvene the court.
June 18th, the Supreme Court does reconvene, just long enough to overrule Douglas. June 19th, the Rosenbergs will die tonight unless the president says no. He is the only one who can. Finally, Eisenhower speaks, though indirectly.
The following is part of a statement just issued by the President of the United States. I can only say that by immeasurably increasing the chances of atomic war, The Rosenbergs may have condemned to death tens of millions of innocent people all over the world. I will not intervene in this matter.
The news reaches New York, where in Union Square, a celebration becomes a death watch. And New Jersey?
We're watching a baseball game, and they kept interrupting the baseball game with news bulletins. First, the Supreme Court overturned Douglas's stay. Then, very quickly, Eisenhower denies clemency. And then, horrendously, there was even a further blow. The warden announced that reporters should come early because they were making the execution early.
They didn't want to have the execution take place in violation of the Jewish Sabbath.
Rabbi Irving Koslow, the Jewish chaplain at Sing Sing.
The function of the chaplain was to prepare them spiritually and also give them some understanding of what would take place. They're frightened. I believe frightened to death. Everything that would occur, every detail, was gone through with him. For example, he was given a haircut. He was frightened. I told him a haircut was to prepare him for the metal piece on his head. A slit made in his pants. Well, that was for the electrode placed on his foot. I've never met a person in my experience that wasn't frightened of dying.
But at 8 p.m., die they will unless something happens. All phone lines are open. The Rosenbergs hope for a miracle. The FBI hopes for a confession.
We regarded Julius as a more apt candidate to cooperate with us than Ethel. We thought that Ethel was the stronger-minded person when it came down to facing death. We really didn't want either one of them to die. What we wanted was for them to confess and to name their accomplices.
It's almost 8, no confessions, and now, no more time.
Neither of them said anything. There was no expression on their faces. Mrs. Rosenberg approached the electric chair, and then she suddenly turned away from it and toward Mrs. Evans, and they kissed each other. The executions took place rapidly, except that in Mrs. Rosenberg's case, she required 2 more charges than her husband had. The customary number is 3, and in her case, it required 5.
As a human being, I felt that justice was done, that I worked long and hard on this case, and that the government's position was 100% correct.
I walked in the house, and there were all these adults there, and I just looked at them, and I said, what happened? And nobody would answer me directly, and so I knew that was it. They were dead. I was really incapable of reacting, really, so I basically sat down and very dry-eyed just looked at my hands. And my friend piped up, you're taking it just like a man, Mike, he was my age, too. And the woman who we were staying with hugged me and said, you'll stay here with us. And I thought, well, yes, I will.
But the young children, oh my brothers, they are weeping bitterly. They are weeping in the playtime of the others, in the country of the free. Lines from Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I thank you from a full heart. God bless you all. Lines from another Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth II. Come back to June of 1953 for a coronation and another crowning glory.
Come back to Dangerous Assumptions, spring 1953, when our world continues.
Welcome back to the Dangerous Assumptions of Spring 1953. Like sex and Winston Churchill. This spring, this legendary English bulldog is to have knighthood conferred upon him by Britain's monarch. But when asked about the future role of women later on, he says it will be the same, I trust, as it has been since the days of Adam and Eve. 3 possible answers. 1, when it comes to Eve, Churchill knows something we don't. 2, when it comes to Britain's monarch, we know something Churchill doesn't. 3, when it comes to women, all assumptions are dangerous, especially in 1953. Start there.
Jacqueline Cochran at 43 broke the sound barrier. Claire Booth Luce at 50 became our first woman ambassador to a major nation, posted to Italy. In London, 27-year-old Queen Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was about to be crowned. And across the sea, this old colony caught a case of coronation fever.
You act proud and I'll act prouder. You sing loud and I'll sing louder. Tonight we're setting the woods on fire.
A woman from Texas was so excited that she wrote Elizabeth a letter.
I said, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, arriving May the 30th, would appreciate, need accommodations. Please advise. Would see you on arrival in London. Signed at Louise Cochran, 8148 Eastern Street, Houston, Texas.
The Queen put her up in Kensington Palace, and Miss Cochran was among the rain-soaked millions on the coronation route.
The moment when the Queen passed built up. We could hear the cheers of the crowd over the loudspeakers as she passed various other points along the processional way.
Francis Booth was an American student visiting in London.
Finally, this magnificent coach and these great horses appeared round the bend and came down Hyde Park towards us. And there she was. She was very young and very beautiful and probably rather scared.
We had 15 cameras on the route and 5 cameras in the Abbey.
Peter Dimmick was in charge of production for the BBC's black and white telecast.
The ceremony itself was quite spectacular. Remember, this is the first time the coronation from Westminster Abbey had ever been televised.
Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the peoples of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Union of South Africa, Pakistan, and Ceylon, and of your possessions according to their respective laws and customs?
I solemnly promise so to do.
I was tipped off from Buckingham Palace in the morning that Prince Charles, hopefully, would come in to see his mother crowned. And sure enough, just before the moment of crowning, he was brought into the Abbey.
Church bells all over London began to ring, and we heard the Archbishop's voice through this thunder. And the guns were so close to us, the ground moved. I mean, it was a terrific moment.
The same day England gets a new queen, England's new queen gets a message that 1 week earlier, the men on a mountain, some of them called Everest, decided to have a go at those last 3,000 deadly feet.
I planned 2 attempts, what we called them rather military fashion assaults at the time. And the first assault was to be made by Tom Bowdoin and Charles Evans.
Tenzing, who wasn't chosen, said one didn't assault the mountain where Buddha lives. One made a pilgrimage. Tenzing wasn't British.
I think I personally was very hopeful that the 2 friends of mine would get up and would be successful. On the other hand, I really think that Tenzing felt that it was almost his right, in a sense, to be one of the first to the top.
Finally, Hillary and Tenzing spied the first team returning. This time, man had gotten within 300 feet of conquering the mountain before the mountain had conquered man again.
They did have, actually, I think, a little bit of an argument almost on the south summit. Tom Bowdoin felt that they could push on, and Charles Evans, who was probably the senior member of the pair, he felt if they did push on, they would probably never return.
Now a beekeeper and a pilgrim would see what progress they could make. Tenzing, Hillary, and their support team were for the next day and night stopped cold by the cold and the wind. When you spit, says Tenzing, it becomes ice and falls like a stone. On the morning of May 28th, they started to climb. Slightly more than 1,000 feet from the summit, the support team headed back down, while above, out of sight of the camera, Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary pitched a tent on the edge of nowhere to wait till dawn.
Even establishing that camp was not easy. There was quite severe gusts of wind. I think it was around about 4:30 in the morning that the wind had eased off, and I looked out of the tent door. I could see that the weather looked pretty good.
They were fortunate in having a near perfect day. There was nothing more than a breeze blowing across the summit ridge. We were very tense by then. This was the climax of all our plans and efforts on the mountain, and a high state of tension prevailed throughout the 29th.
The final ridge runs along towards the top, and about halfway along there's about a 40-foot high rock step. It really did, 29,000 feet, look pretty steep and difficult. But then I noticed a narrow crack, just large enough for me to sort of crawl inside. And I was able to wriggle and jam my way up to the top of the step and pull myself out panting. But once we got up that rock step, I really felt we're going to do it.
They climbed the mountain until there was no more mountain to climb. Hillary took this picture of Tenzing.
Tenzing threw his arms around my shoulder, and I threw my arms around his shoulder, and we gave each other a good hug. So in the end, we really were quite emotional when we got there.
For 15 minutes, man stood for the first time at the top of his world. What did he see? The beekeeper said the whole world looked spread out like a giant relief map. The pilgrim said all the hills below looked to him like Buddha gods.
Take my hand, I'm a stranger in paradise, all lost in a wonderland.
Nepal, India, Great Britain, the United Nations. They flew 4 flags up there, and which man was truly the first man up there? Hillary never said. Tenzing did. Tenzing said it was Tenzing. Tenzing said it was Hillary. Tenzing said it was you. Tenzing said it was me. What is known for sure is this. Soon after Tenzing and Hillary returned, an Indian Air Force plane flew close to the summit, then reported there was nothing to show man had been there, ever.
In a moment, Our World continues. Dangerous Assumptions, Spring 1953.
Welcome back to some legacies from the spring of 1953. Some of our most cherished assumptions were undermined that spring, assumptions about human behavior under stress and the deterrent value of capital punishment. And the jury is still out on one presumably unshakable assumption. What if Mount Everest comes up a little short?
Don't let the stars get in your eyes, don't let the moon break your heart.
Hillary and Tenzing may not have climbed the highest mountain after all. A survey indicates that Everest's neighbor, K2, might be higher. An American expedition will remeasure both peaks this summer and enlighten a breathless world.
July 53, the war ended. Truce, not victory. The U.S. Army decided to issue a code of conduct for American POWs. They were not to let foreigners wash their brains. The North Vietnamese tried and found most American brains hard to wash.
After their parents' execution, Michael and Robbie Rosenberg were adopted by a couple named Mirapol and took their name. In the 70s, they acknowledged their heritage, wrote a book advocating their parents' innocence, and continue to pursue that cause. Last year, John Walker and Jerry Whitworth were sentenced to life in prison for espionage on behalf of the Soviet Union. And 2 U.S. Marine guards at the American Embassy in Moscow have been accused of espionage. Ideology seems to have been replaced by sex and money as temptations to espionage.
Will not stop.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the theater. Jaws 3, 3D 2. And in this corner, the video cassette recorder. TV has its own enemy now. A little box is found in 40% of American homes, and it cuts into the profits of TV. Ironically, the sale of VCR rights is helping to finance new films and saving some Hollywood duds. TV Guide kept growing. Today it has the largest circulation of any magazine in the country. Never assume.
Well, there it is, the way it has been since last fall, and the way it will be for the next few months. 13 chapters of Our World are scheduled for rebroadcast between now and the end of the summer. But this is the last of the series that began last September. Our World has not been renewed for next fall. You have been faithful and eloquent supporters of Our World. You deserve better. I hope you get it. Thank you.
When Paddy Chayefsky wrote Marty in 1953, he believed that television would be the center ring of the 20th century culture. But he changed his mind, and so in 1976 he wrote Network. It's a satire on television in which the anchorman asked the viewer to get up out of his chair, go to the window, open it, and yell, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore." Always a great idea. Trouble is, every great idea has a flaw equal to or exceeding the greatness of the idea. And nature always sides with the flaw. Take Our World, a great idea. Our flaw was we didn't have enough audience. But just because we won't be here next year, that doesn't mean we weren't here this year. We were, and we are proud of Our World. It was about history. It is about to become history. Nothing is always. Thank you for watching. And by the way, if you wonder whether this sort of thing gets easier with practice, it doesn't. And so it goes.